Hey, and welcome to part 2 of making the fruit slicer game in Unity. In this part, we will control the knife animation based on our input, and we will put the fruits and vegetables in our scene. So to fully understand it, make sure you have seen the part 1 of this series. And do one thing before that. Hit that red subscribe button so you don't miss the next part. So let's go. Okay, back in Unity, let's click this button here so we can see the lighting in real time. So we have the knife cut animation if you run the game. Right, so let's make it only cut when the user touches the area here. Touches or click the area here. Otherwise, it will not do anything. So turn it off and select the knife parent object. And here in the animator, let's double click on the controller. Alright, so select the cut state and let's name it base state and set the motion from cut to none. So don't worry about the cut state, we're going to create it here. So the base state is going to be our default state. So right click here and create an empty state. This is going to be our cut state. So I'm gonna name it cut and set the motion from none to cut animation. Okay, now we need some parameters to change the behavior of our animation. So click on parameters, this plus sign, and select the bool. Let's name it is cutting. Hit plus again and select a boolean. Let's name it is hit. Hit plus again and select a float variable. This is going to be our speed. Okay, now it's time to make a proper transition from our base resting state to cutting state. So right click on base state and select make transition and move it to cut. Now select this arrow and in the conditions hit plus and make sure you have the is cutting state to true. I hope you get the point that this base state is our knife's resting state and it's gonna change to cut animation once the is cutting flag is true. Similarly, right click on the cut animation and make transition back to the base state and set its condition is cutting from true to false. Okay, one thing we want to do is to able to control the speed of the cutting animation. So select the cut box and set the speed to 0.25 and check the multiplier parameters and this is the speed variable we just created here, right? So we can control the speed of the animation from code behind, right? So this is the reason we created this speed parameter. So for the time being, set the speed to 1. Okay, now take a deep breath. It's time to go to the scripting side. So in the scripts folder, add a new script. Let's name it knife. Okay, now double click to open in the Visual Studio. Okay, now let's zoom it a bit. Right, so now let's create some variables. Public animator. This is the animator component. Knife animator. Public bool is cutting. Private rect screen bounds. So what I want to do is to play the cutting animation when the player clicks or touches this area in the lower half of the screen, right? So I'm gonna get the screen bounds in the start function. So in the start function, screen bounds equal to new rectangle 0 0 screen dot width and screen dot height negative 200. It's the lower half. So we have the bounds in the start function. Now let's create a new method named setCuttingState. Public void setCuttingState boolean state, whatever the state we pass to this function. We set the isCutting variable equal to state, and we take the knife animator dot setBool, and the variable name was isCutting equal to state. Okay, now in the fixed update, we check if input dot get mouse button 0, which is the left click, and the screen bounds dot contains input dot mouse position. Here we are checking if the mouse button is down and the mouse position is inside the lower half of the screen. And we check if the cutting state is false. We set cutting state to true. The knife's gonna start cutting. Otherwise, set the isCutting state to false. Okay, now go back in Unity, expand the knife parent object, select the mesh and drag and drop the knife script here, and now click here and select the knife parent animator. Okay, one thing we're gonna do is to go select the knife parent, go into the animator, and if you select this arrow here, also uncheck the has exit time flare. Okay, so now let's run the game. Well, if I hold down the mouse button, and you see now it's cutting it, and if you leave the mouse, it stops. If I hold it again and let it go, it stops. But I think there is a little problem here. There is a slight delay between ending the animation, because if you see, if I let go, it doesn't stop right away. There is a slight delay in ending the animation. So I know where the problem is. So let's end the debugging. So select the knife parent object, go into the animator, and select this arrow here, which returns to the base state. And if you expand the settings, you see it takes 0.25 seconds to return to the base state. So I'm going to set it to 0. Okay, now let's play. If I hold it down, it starts cutting. If I let go, it stops right away without any delay. I'm holding it down, I let it go, stops again. So it looks like it is following our orders now. So we have the knife under control, so let's do some fun. Let's create some speeding effect here in the game environment that something fast is going on. You will see what I'm talking about in a few minutes. So right click and create empty. Call it speed visual. Set its position X to 215, position Y to 122, and position Z to 403. Now right click here in the project and create a new folder. I'm going to call it particles. Now inside this folder, right click and import new asset. So in the folder you just downloaded, go into the particles and select the spot particle PNG. Now in the materials folder, right click and create new material. I'm going to call it visual. Now in the shader, search for additive, this one, and select the texture image to the spot particle and set the render queue to 100. Now inside this speed visual, right click and create a particle system. I am going to name it visual 1 and set its position X to 1730, position Y to 255, and position Z to -319. And set the rotation angle Y to -90. And also set the scale to 37 on each side. Now in the particle system, go into the renderer, select the material to this one, the speeding visual, and set the render mode to horizontal billboard. Now scroll up and set the start lifetime to 9.5, start speed to 35, and start size to 1.3, and set the max particle to 80. Now expand the emission and set the rate over time to 2.5, and now expand the shape and set the angle to 0. Finally, expand the size over lifetime and check the separate axis. We want to define different axes for X, Y, and Z for our particle. So click on the X. Now select this box here which shows the line on the very top of the angle. This, and set this value here to 140. Now select the Y-axis, click the top image and set its value to 5. Leave the Z-axis as it is. Right? If you see in the game, yes, it looks like something fast is going on. Now I think I better change the color of the particle to more yellowish like. Let's click the color of lifetime and let's dim the alpha and select this color and make it more yellowish or orange like. And I want to change a little bit alpha. Well, that's more like it. Now I'm going back to the scene and I'm gonna duplicate this visual by pressing Ctrl D. Let's name it visual 2, and I'm gonna place it right here. I think that looks nice. Okay, now if I run the game, yeah, some nice speeding effect. We are actually going to control the speed of the particles from the code behind. Alright, so the speeding is done, so let's move on. Alright guys, now it's time to put the fruits in the scene. Now in the models folder, right click and import new assets. Go into the models folder you just downloaded and select banana, carrot, lemon, potato, and tomato. Click import. Right, now I'm going to show you guys the structure of these 3D fruit models. So, for example, drag the banana in the scene. Now drag and drop the banana object into the prefab, original prefab, and delete the original from the scene. Now if you select the banana in the prefabs folder and open it, you see that it's actually a main object which comprises of separate different parts. You see? Right. If I select any of the part and move it, you see that it's perfectly sliced. So I hope you get the idea of what are we going to do. That when the knife hits any of the part of the fruit, we're gonna separate that part and it will give us an impression of being sliced. So you might be wondering, how do you separate a 3D mesh like this into different parts? Well, I'm going to show you an example. Well, before that, let me remind you, as I said before, that I will not show you how to model 3D objects. I'm just going to show you how to break a solid mesh into pieces. Alright, so let me put it back. So for example, a 3D designer has created a 3D object for you, which in my case is a test banana solid object, right? So make sure you have a .obj extension of this 3D object. So what you're gonna do, you're gonna open up Blender. Once the Blender is open, delete the default cube. Now go into the file, import, and the wavefront.obj file, and then select the test banana object, whatever your solid mesh object is. Right, so let me scale it for you guys. Scale it to 100, 100, 100. Right, so it's a solid mesh object. So how are we going to break it apart? So now, here in the object mode, click and switch to edit mode. Then you see the vertices are dividing the mesh into many sides. So what you're gonna do is to switch to the face select mode. There are multiple modes like vertices selection, edge selection. So we need the face selection. And now hold the Alt key down and select a vertex. And you see, by holding the Alt key down, it's selected from all the sides, right? So I'm gonna hold the Shift key down, Alt, and click, and you see we have a part of the mesh selected. So what you're gonna do is to hit P, so it opens up this separate menu. So here you see multiple options of how you want to separate something. So what you're gonna do is we want to separate by selection, that separate whatever the part is selected. So I'm gonna click it, so you see that it's now separated from the main mesh. So I'm gonna select some other parts by holding the Shift key down, right, and then bring P selection. Alternatively, you can go into the mesh, vertices, and separate by selection. So by this way we're gonna select part of the mesh and then bring up the separate menu and separate the mesh. So I'm gonna pause the video and do the same for the remaining parts of the mesh. So by using these methods, you see I have separated the parts like this. So now you go to File, Export as a wavefront OBJ file. Now give it a name as test banana divided, and you scroll it down here uncheck this option, this, and uncheck this, but make sure you select the material groups. Okay, make sure only these three options are selected. Now hit export obj. Right, you see we have the divided obj object. Now go back into the Unity. Now in the models, right click import and select the divided object. Now drag it in the scene. Now drag the object into the prefabs. It's only for testing purpose, we will delete it, don't worry about it. So I'm going to open the prefab, and you see the parts are separated just like this, just like we need it, right? So if I select a part and move it, you see it's completely separate of the parent mesh. So this is how our fruits are divided in the game. Now I hope you get the idea of how the fruits are made. Now delete it. Now delete this object, it was only for demonstration, no need. Right, so you now know how the fruits are divided like that. So now in the models folder, drag and drop the fruits and vegetables in the scene, and then drop them into the prefabs folder one by one, and delete them from the view. Right, now one by one we are going to apply texture to our fruits and vegetables. So all the textures I'm going to use are present in the textures folder. Okay, now first select the banana, open the prefab. We are going to do our texturing here. So go into the textures folder, right click and import. Now go into the textures folder you just downloaded and select banana text. Right, so this is the banana texture. Now go into the materials, right click and create new material. Let's call it simple banana. Now here in the albedo, click here and select the banana texture and put the color to this, more yellowish like, and set the smoothness to 0. Right, so we have the banana material. Now select each piece of the banana and drag and drop the banana material to here like this. So select each part and drag and drop. Okay, I've applied the textures to all the parts. Now if you select a part and move it, you see it's a perfect texture for the banana. So you might be wondering, how do you create the textures like this? Well, I will try to make a separate video about it to explain this topic more. But for this game, I'm just going to use the textures I have. Okay, banana is done. Now go for the potato, open the prefab, and the same thing, you go into the texture and right click import and select the potato texture. Then you go into material, create new material, potato, albedo, select the potato texture like this and set the smoothness to 0. Now apply this texture to each of the parts. Alright, so I've applied the texture to all of the parts of the potato, but you see it is not that smooth looking. It doesn't look like a potato at all. So to fix it, go into the models, select the potato mesh, and then slide down and change the normal modes to unweighted legacy and set the smoothing angle to 25. Now hit apply, right? So you see our potato looks ready to be fried. Okay, now it's time to move to the carrot. Now select the carrot and open the prefab. Now go into the texture and import the carrot prefab. Texture. And then you go into the materials, create a new material, carrot, and select the albedo to this carrot material. Set the smoothness to 0. Now drag and drop this material to each of the parts except the leaf. Okay, so I'm gonna drag and drop the material to each of the parts. Now let me pause the video and apply to all of these parts except the leaf. Alright, so now for the leaf part, go into the texture, click import and select leaves. Now in the material, create a new material, call it leaf, and set the albedo to leaves, and set the rendering mode from opaque to cutout, and set both the alpha cutout and metallic to 0.73. Now select the leaf part of the carrot and drag and drop the leaf material to here. Right, so it looks like our carrot is ready. Okay, now let's get the lemon out of the way. So open the lemon prefab, and now in the textures, import the lemon texture, or the orange you can call it. Now in the material, create a new material, call it lemon, and select the lemon texture, set the smoothness to 0. Alright, so now apply this texture to all of the parts. Okay, so you have applied the texture to all of the parts. So if I move a part, you see, we have a perfect texture for the lemon. But outwardly it doesn't look smooth, so what you're gonna do is in the material, select the lemon material, and in the shader, select from standard to unlit. Right, so now we have a smooth lemon, or you can call it an orange. So it's complete. Okay, now finally it's time for the tomato. So in the texture, right click and import and select the tomato texture. Now in the material, create a new material, tomato. Similarly, select the texture in the albedo and set the smoothness to 0. Now open the tomato prefab like this, and we're going to repeat the same procedure for all of the parts by dragging and dropping the part here, selecting the second part and drag and drop here. Alright, the texturing is done, but there's something missing, the leaves. So what you're gonna do is to select the middle part, which is the 3, and we're gonna set the size of the materials to 2 and drag and drop the leaves material to element 1. So there you have it. Simple as that, and the tomato is ready. So guys, we have texturized all the fruits we'll be using. So now it's time to render them into our game. So let's do it. So first select the banana and add component and add the movable script to here and set the speed to 600. And do this for all of the objects. Okay, so I have added the movable script to all of the fruits: tomato, potato, lemon, carrot, and banana. So now it's time to render them here. So go into the object spawner and change the size from 2 to 5. We don't need the cube and sphere anymore, so in the element 0, so drag and drop the banana, and element 1 carrot, whatever order you wish. potato, and tomato. Okay, now let's play. Tomato looks too small, so I'm going to change the size of the tomato. So let's make it a little bit bigger. 0.3, 1.3, and 1.3. Okay, so now let's hit play and see what's going on. Alrighty, so this is exactly what we are looking for. So we have the knife under control, some nice speeding effects, and our fruits are texturized and rendered in the scene. So okay guys, I'm going to end this part here. In the next part we will cut the fruits whenever the knife hits them, and we're gonna spawn some obstacle in the scene to give the player a little bit of challenge. So make sure you leave a like on this video and hit that subscribe so you don't miss the next part and many more exciting stuff. So stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you later.